They say success is the best revenge. But watching your high school bully scrub your marble floors while you count your millions? That is pure poetry written in the language of justice that only the universe truly understands. When I was in school, I was not just the poor kid. I was the poster child for everything that money could not buy but that cruelty could destroy. You know the type. The one who wore hand-me-down shoes with soles so thin you could feel every pebble on the sidewalk, who packed lunches that consisted of whatever scraps could be found in an almost empty refrigerator, who carried a worn-out backpack with one working zipper that had to be coaxed and pleated with every morning just to hold together for another day. If you have ever been the poor kid in a school full of privilege, you know one thing for certain. You do not get teased. Teasing is what happens between friends, between equals, between people who share the same social playground. What happens to poor kids is something much darker, much more systematic, much more soul-crushing. You get tormented. You get targeted. You get turned into a daily reminder for everyone else of what they never want to become. My name is Mia Harper, and the person who made my life an absolute living hell for 4 years was Chelsea Monroe. She was not just your average mean girl with a sharp tongue and a cruel smile. Chelsea was something far more dangerous. She was a mean girl with unlimited resources, endless ammunition, and the kind of confidence that only comes from never having to worry about where your next meal will come from or whether your shoes will last until the end of the semester. Chelsea had money. More accurately, her parents had money, old money, new money, the kind of money that bought not just things but also influence, respect, and the unspoken understanding that certain rules simply did not apply to people like her. She would glide into school each morning wearing designer shoes that cost more than my family spent on groceries in a month, carrying handbags that were probably worth more than our rent, dressed in outfits that looked like they had been assembled by a team of professional stylists. And she would use all of that wealth, all of that privilege, all of that power as a weapon against me. Every single day. "Did you get that sweater out of a trash can, Mia?" she would ask loudly enough for everyone in the hallway to hear, her voice dripping with fake concern that fooled no one but somehow made the cruelty even worse. "Because if you did, I know some really good charity organizations that could help you find something that actually fits. Do you eat actual food at home, or do you just live off dreams and wishful thinking?" she would continue, examining my packed lunch with the kind of theatrical disgust that should have earned her an Oscar. "Because that sandwich looks like it was made with ingredients from the clearance section of a gas station." She had an endless supply of these verbal daggers, each one carefully crafted to hit exactly where it would hurt the most. She would comment on my shoes, pointing out every scuff mark and hole as if she were conducting a scientific study of poverty. She would accidentally bump into me in the hallway, causing me to drop my books, and then apologize with exaggerated sincerity, while her friends giggled behind their perfectly manicured hands. But the worst incident, the one that still makes my blood boil with rage even 20 years later, happened on a Tuesday in October during my junior year. I was sitting in the cafeteria, trying to make myself invisible while eating my sad little sandwich, when Chelsea approached my table with her usual entourage of enablers and admirers. She was carrying a large cup of orange juice, and she had that particular smile on her face that I had learned to recognize as a warning sign. Before I could react, before I could move or protect myself or even understand what was happening, she poured the entire contents of that cup directly into my open backpack. "Oops," she said with mock innocence as the sticky orange liquid soaked through my notebooks, my textbooks, my homework assignments that I had spent hours completing the night before. "I guess your backpack needed a charity bath. Maybe now it will not smell like poverty anymore." The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Not the kind of nervous, uncomfortable laughter that sometimes happens when people do not know how to react to cruelty, but genuine, delighted laughter from students who were entertained by my humiliation. I sat there in stunned silence, watching orange juice drip from my backpack onto the floor, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on me, knowing that this moment would be replayed and discussed and laughed about for weeks to come. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to stand up and pour something on her perfect designer outfit, and see how she liked being humiliated in front of everyone. But I could not do any of those things, because I knew that any reaction from me would only make things worse. Poor kids do not get to fight back. Poor kids do not get to demand justice. Poor kids just have to take whatever punishment the world decides to dish out, and be grateful that it was not worse. So I sat there in silence, carefully gathering my ruined belongings, wiping orange juice off my hands with a napkin that immediately fell apart, and pretending that this was not the most humiliating moment of my young life. I walked to the bathroom, cleaned up as best I could, and then spent the rest of the day pretending that nothing had happened while the smell of orange juice followed me from class to class like a badge of shame. The teachers saw everything. They heard everything. They knew exactly what was happening, but they never intervened. Not once. Looking back, I think they were afraid of Chelsea's parents, afraid of the power and influence that money could buy, afraid of the consequences that might come from disciplining a student whose family could make their lives very difficult with a single phone call. My classmates were even worse. They laughed at Chelsea's jokes, encouraged her behavior, and treated my suffering like it was entertainment designed specifically for their amusement. Some of them were probably relieved that Chelsea had chosen me as her target instead of them. Others genuinely seemed to believe that I deserved the treatment I was receiving, that being poor was some kind of moral failing that justified any cruelty directed my way. I cried myself to sleep most nights during those 4 years, not just because of the daily humiliation, but because I felt so completely alone in the world. I had no allies, no defenders, no one who seemed to care that a human being was being systematically destroyed by another human being for no reason other than economic circumstances that were completely beyond my control. But what Chelsea did not know, what none of them knew, was that I was not just enduring their cruelty. I was learning from it. I was studying the dynamics of power and privilege, watching how money moved through social circles, observing how success was measured and valued in our society. I was taking mental notes on everything, every brand name Chelsea wore, every restaurant she mentioned, every vacation destination she bragged about, every casual reference to investments and opportunities and connections that seemed to flow naturally to people like her. Most importantly, I was making myself a promise that I would never, ever forget how it felt to be powerless. A promise that I would never, ever forget the faces of the people who had chosen to be cruel, when they could have chosen to be kind. And a promise that someday, somehow, I would find a way to transform all of this pain into something that resembled justice. After graduation, we lost touch completely. Chelsea went off to some expensive private college that her parents had undoubtedly bought her way into, while I enrolled in the local community college, and worked nights at an all-night diner to pay for my classes and keep a roof over my head. While she was probably pledging sororities and attending parties and having the kind of carefree college experience that money can buy, I was serving coffee to drunk truckers at 3 in the morning, and falling asleep over textbooks that I had bought used and highlighted so heavily that they looked like rainbow disasters. But I had something that Chelsea did not have. I had hunger. Not just physical hunger, though there was plenty of that, but a deep, burning, relentless hunger for something better. I was hungry for knowledge, hungry for opportunity, hungry for the kind of success that would make it impossible for anyone to ever treat me the way Chelsea had treated me. During my breaks at the diner, I taught myself web design on a second-hand laptop that I had bought with tips from my waitressing job. The screen flickered constantly, the keyboard was missing several keys, and the battery lasted about 20 minutes, but it was mine. And it was my gateway to a world of possibilities that I had never imagined. I started small, building websites for local businesses that could not afford to hire professional designers. I charged almost nothing at first, just enough to cover my costs and maybe buy a few groceries, but I was learning valuable skills with every project. I was discovering that I had a natural talent for understanding what people wanted and needed, for translating their visions into digital reality, for solving problems that seemed impossible to everyone else. Slowly, carefully, I began to build a small freelance business. I created a portfolio, established a reputation, started charging higher rates as my skills improved and my client base grew. I was working 18-hour days between the diner and my web design projects, surviving on coffee and determination, and the kind of focused rage that can only come from having something to prove to people who had written you off as worthless. Within 3 years, I was making more money from my freelance work than I was from waitressing, so I quit the diner and focused full-time on building my business. I hired my first employee, then my second, then my third. I moved out of my tiny apartment and into a small office space. I started developing my own software platforms instead of just building websites for other people. By the time I was 25, I had launched my first major platform, a social media management tool that helped small businesses organize their online presence. It was exactly the kind of solution that I had wished existed when I was building websites for local shops and restaurants. The platform took off immediately, growing from a few hundred users to several thousand in just a few months. I sold that platform to a larger company for more money than I had ever imagined possible. Suddenly, I was not just financially stable. I was wealthy. Not Chelsea-level wealthy yet, but wealthy enough to buy a house, to drive a reliable car, to eat at restaurants without checking the prices first, to shop for clothes in stores instead of thrift shops. But I was not done. I was just getting started. I used the money from that first sale to fund my next venture, and then the next one after that. I developed a talent for identifying problems that technology could solve, for building teams that could turn ideas into reality, for understanding markets in ways that my competitors could not match. Every success built on the previous one, creating a momentum that seemed to accelerate with each passing year. By 30, I owned a thriving tech startup that employed over 100 people, for properties in different cities, and a car that I had seen Chelsea posting envious photos of from behind the glass at the luxury auto mall when we were teenagers. I had gone from being the poor kid who got orange juice poured on her belongings to being a millionaire entrepreneur who was featured in business magazines and invited to speak at conferences. But success had not made me forget. If anything, it had made my memories sharper, more focused, more purposeful. I still remembered exactly how it felt to sit in that cafeteria with orange juice dripping from my backpack, while a room full of people laughed at my humiliation. I still remembered every cruel word Chelsea had ever said to me, every dismissive look, every moment when she had used her privilege as a weapon against my vulnerability. One day, while I was preparing to move into my newest property, a mansion that I had purchased in the same upscale neighborhood where Chelsea's parents had lived when we were in school, I decided to hire a luxury cleaning service to help me get the house ready. I went online, found a company with excellent reviews, and requested a quote for a comprehensive deep cleaning. The company called me back within hours to schedule an appointment. They assured me that they would send their best team, that they specialized in high-end properties, that they understood the level of service that discerning clients expected. I gave them my address and scheduled the appointment for the following Tuesday. When Tuesday morning arrived, I was in my home office, reviewing some contracts and preparing for a conference call with potential investors. The doorbell rang at exactly the appointed time, and I walked to the front door expecting to meet a team of professional cleaners who would help me transform my new house into the perfect home. Instead, I opened the door and found myself face to face with Chelsea Monroe. She was standing on my doorstep, wearing a uniform shirt with the cleaning company's logo, carrying a bucket full of supplies, looking every bit the part of a working-class service provider. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail instead of the elaborate styles she had worn in high school. Her hands showed the signs of manual labor, rough, practical, unglamorous. Her face had aged in the way that stress and financial worry can age a person, adding lines and shadows that spoke of struggles I had never imagined she would face. She did not recognize me at first. 20 years had changed me as much as they had changed her, but in the opposite direction. I had grown into my looks, learned how to dress well, developed the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever challenges life throws your way. I was wearing clothes that cost more than she used to spend on a single outfit, standing in the doorway of a house that was probably worth more than her parents' old house. "Good morning," I said pleasantly, as if I were greeting any service provider. "I am Mia. You must be here for the cleaning appointment." Her eyes squinted slightly, as if she were trying to place me but could not quite make the connection. Then slowly, recognition dawned across her face like a sunrise breaking over a landscape of disbelief. "Wait," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mia Harper?" The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. I could see her mind racing, trying to process what she was seeing, trying to reconcile the person she remembered with the person standing in front of her. The poor kid with the hand-me-down clothes and the broken backpack had somehow transformed into a wealthy woman with a mansion, and the kind of quiet authority that comes from genuine success. That is right, I said, stepping aside to welcome her in. Please come in. Let me show you around so you can see what needs to be done. I led her through my home like a tour guide showing off a masterpiece. I showed her the custom marble floors that had been imported from Italy, pointing out the intricate patterns and explaining how much care they required. I showed her the crystal chandelier that hung in the main living area, describing how delicate the cleaning process needed to be. I showed her the indoor garden with its carefully maintained tropical plants, and the specialized irrigation system that kept everything green and thriving. With each room, I could see her growing smaller, more overwhelmed, more aware of the impossible distance between where she was and where I had ended up. This was not just a house. It was a monument to everything she had told me I would never achieve. Everything she had insisted was beyond my reach. Everything she had used to justify her cruelty all those years ago. Finally, we reached the kitchen, and I turned to face her directly. You will be starting in here, I said, handing her a pair of rubber gloves, a bottle of premium cleaning solution, and a bucket. The marble countertops require special attention, and I trust you will be very careful with them. Her hands were trembling as she took the supplies from me. I could see the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. The girl who had once poured orange juice on my belongings was now being asked to clean surfaces that were worth more than most people's cars. I did not humiliate her. I did not call her names. I did not throw her past behavior in her face or gloat about the reversal of our fortunes. I simply stood there and watched her work, letting the situation speak for itself, letting the reality of our respective positions tell the story that words could never adequately capture. She scrubbed my countertops in complete silence, her movements careful and precise, her focus intense and professional. But I could see the emotional turmoil in her eyes, the way she kept glancing at me when she thought I was not looking, the way her breathing became shallow and quick whenever our eyes met. I moved through the house while she worked, checking emails, making phone calls, handling the kind of business that had made this life possible. Occasionally, I would pass through the kitchen and see her there, bent over her work, transformed from the predator of my teenage years into just another person trying to make an honest living in a world that had not turned out the way she had expected. The irony was not lost on me. Here was Chelsea Monroe, the girl who had once mocked my poverty and predicted my failure, now cleaning my kitchen for money. The girl who had treated me like I was beneath her notice was now literally working beneath me, in my house, by my rules, for my approval. But the most beautiful part was not the role reversal itself. It was the fact that I had not sought this situation out, had not engineered it or manipulated it or planned it. The universe had delivered this moment to me as a gift, a perfect example of how life has a way of balancing the scales when we least expect it. When she finished the kitchen, I showed her to the next room, and then the next, watching her work her way through my house with the same methodical attention to detail that she had once applied to tormenting me. She cleaned my floors, dusted my furniture, organized my belongings, and slowly transformed my new house into the spotless, gleaming home I had envisioned. At the end of the day, when every surface had been cleaned and every room had been perfected, I walked her to the front door and handed her an envelope containing her payment. But instead of the standard rate that the cleaning company had quoted me, I had included double the amount in cash. "Thank you for your excellent work," I said, pressing the envelope into her hands. "I was very impressed with your attention to detail." Then I handed her a small folded piece of paper, a note that I had written while she was working in the final room. She opened it and read the simple message I had written. "For the sweater and the orange juice." Her face turned bright red, and her voice cracked when she tried to speak. I am sorry," she whispered, the words coming out like a confession that had been trapped inside her for 20 years. I nodded calmly, accepting her apology with the same grace that I had once wished someone would show me. "I know you are," I said, "but I am not the only person you need to say that to." I was not referring to myself. I was referring to the girl I used to be, the scared, humiliated, powerless teenager who had absorbed every cruel word and carried them with her into adulthood. That girl deserved an apology that could never be fully given, because you cannot go back in time and undo the damage that words can do to a young person's sense of self-worth. As Chelsea walked away from my mansion, carrying her cleaning supplies and her envelope full of cash. I felt something I had not expected to feel, not triumph, not revenge, but a kind of peaceful closure. The scared teenager inside me finally understood that she had been wrong about everything. She had been wrong about her own worth, wrong about her own potential, wrong about the limitations that other people had tried to place on her life. Chelsea had once told me that I would never amount to anything, that I would always be poor, that I would never escape the circumstances of my birth. Now she was mopping my floors, cleaning my windows, and accepting my money for her services. The girl who had once treated me like I was worthless was now working in a house that represented everything she had insisted I could never achieve. But the real victory was not in watching her clean my house. It was in realizing that I had become the person I was meant to be despite her cruelty. Not because of it. I had built my success on my own talents, my own determination, my own refusal to accept the limitations that others had tried to impose on me. Chelsea had been nothing more than an obstacle, a source of pain that I had chosen to transform into motivation. I never saw her again after that day. I assumed she went back to her life, whatever that looked like, carrying with her the knowledge that the girl she had once tormented had grown up to achieve everything she had claimed was impossible. I hope that experience taught her something about the power of words, about the danger of underestimating people, about the way that cruelty can come back to haunt you in ways you never imagined. As for me, I continued building my empire, expanding my businesses, creating opportunities for other people who might have been dismissed or underestimated the way I had been. I established a scholarship fund for students from low-income families, specifically targeting kids who showed promise in technology and entrepreneurship. I made sure that no child in my community would have to choose between eating and learning the way I had. But perhaps most importantly, I learned to forgive. Not Chelsea necessarily, but the part of myself that had carried her words around like stones in my heart for so many years. I realized that holding on to anger and resentment was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. The best revenge was not making her clean my house. It was living so well that her opinion of me had become completely irrelevant. Sometimes people ask me if I planned that encounter, if I somehow arranged for Chelsea to show up at my door as a cleaning lady. The answer is no. I had no idea she worked for that company, had no idea that our paths would cross again in such a perfectly poetic way. But I believe that the universe has a sense of humor, and sometimes it delivers exactly the kind of closure that we need, exactly when we need it. They say that success is the best revenge, but I disagree. The best revenge is becoming so successful that you no longer need revenge. The best revenge is building a life so full of joy and purpose and achievement that the people who try to tear you down become nothing more than footnotes in your story of triumph. Chelsea used to say that I would never amount to anything, that I was destined for failure, that poverty was my permanent address. Now she has seen the mansion I built with my own hands, the empire I created with my own mind, the life I designed with my own dreams. She used to mock my hand-me-down clothes and my second-hand everything. Now she has worked in a house filled with first-class everything, earned money from a woman who once had nothing, and learned that the girl she underestimated had been quietly planning her own resurrection all along. Karma does not always announce itself with fanfare and drama. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wearing rubber gloves and carrying a bucket, ready to clean up the mess that cruelty has made. Sometimes justice looks like a simple reversal of fortune, a quiet moment of recognition, a payment made in full for debts that were never forgotten. And sometimes the best revenge is simply opening your door and saying, "Please come in. Let me show you what impossible looks like." If this story of resilience, transformation, and sweet justice resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel. We share stories of people who refused to let their circumstances define them, who turned their pain into power, and who proved that the only person who gets to write your ending is you. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories of triumph over adversity, and reminds us all that our past does not determine our future. Our determination does.